In this video, we break down Sage, what she can do, and how to play her. What's going on, guys? It's your host, Sergeant Frost, and welcome back to another video. Today, we're covering Sage. We'll go over everything you need to know about her kit, where she fits in a team, as well as how to best play her. Comment down below what you think of her, and let's get right into the video. First things first, Sage is a Sentinel, or well, kinda. Back in the beta, she had some of the most annoying stalling abilities I've ever seen in an FPS. Her slows were awful to play against, her wall was near unbreakable, and she truly showcased this idea of a Sentinel rock that's impossible to push. Nowadays, she's a bit different, however, as she has received some nerfs and she has transitioned into a more of a hybrid role. She's not exactly a Sentinel, but she's not exactly anything else. She's just Sage. That does not mean she's bad. She's basically a must pick on a map like Icebox, and there's not a single map where she truly struggles, so let's dive into her kit. Starting off with her signature healing orb. You press E, get line of sight of a teammate, and press mouse 1 on top of them to get them back up to 100 HP. Or alternatively, you can heal yourself for 30. And since getting only 30% of the value isn't enough of a motivator for most Sages to heal their 1 HP teammate over their 90 HP selves, healing teammates also goes quicker as it takes up 5 seconds, while healing themselves would take double that at 10. Since it's a signature, you get it for free at the start of every round, and after casting it, it'll be returned to you after 45 seconds, which is of course just short enough to use it twice in a round, but long enough that your teammate will be bothering you every 5 seconds if it's on cooldown. Sage's heal is super useful. Like Reyna's heal, it allows you, or more likely your teammates, to get away with taking over 150 damage during the duration of the round. And even when it doesn't, it still makes it so that any 1 HP target can be back to a healthy 100 HP if given enough time. The enemy gets your KJ to 3 health, that information is called, and while the enemy is getting ready to right-click classic her, you've already made her an almost full HP target again. Of course, the usual rule is that you use your heal on whoever is the lowest amount of HP, but if many of your teammates are quite low, and the amounts don't differ much, it's in order of first, whoever is closest to you geographically. Healing someone that's around the corner isn't as much of a hassle as traveling across half the map. Plus, then it goes on cooldown quicker. If they're both standing next to each other, it's whoever requested the heal first. Or maybe more realistically, whoever is queued with you and or who find themselves on top of the scoreboard. Of course, there's also a place for healing yourself, but only do this when you're the only one that can be reasonably healed. If your teammate is 60 HP and they're on Haven C site, while you're on A site, healing yourself isn't as big of a no-no. But picking yourself over a 10 HP teammate around the corner is probably going to get you flamed, and though flaming is never right, they probably do have a point. In one specific case, however, I see a lot of Sage players not use their heal when it actually would be a really good move, namely after they get hit by a single Vandal bullet for 40. 66% of the damage is dealt to your shield and the remaining to your normal health. So 1 Vandal bullet means you're left at 24 shields and 87 health, which totals up to about 110, as Valorant usually rounds up to full numbers. Healing here might seem stupid, as it'll only heal for 13, but it isn't. Being 124 health means you'll be able to survive 3 bullets of a Vandal and still be alive and kicking at 4 HP. If you didn't heal, you'd just be dead. I mean, if your armor only has 10 HP left, you're rebuying that, right? Even if you only get light shields, this is the same thing. Now, before we move on to her wall or other abilities and playstyles, we should quickly mention that if you want to improve, we also offer guides made by pros as well as coaching over on ProGuides.com. For just $8 a month, you get access to everything, including previous boot camps. So if you're serious about ranking up and you want to get better the fastest way possible, make sure to give it a try. Then for her strongest ability, Barrier Orb, or as most people will call it, the Wall. Sage's wall lasts 40 seconds. It's 10 meters long and 2 meters high. It consists of 4 pieces with 800 HP each, or about 20 bullets of a Vandal. The reason we call it her strongest ability is that it allows Sage to make attacking sites a lot harder, or alternatively block off an area of the map entirely for the wall's duration. Think of Haven B site for example. Walling off mid at the start of a round is a fairly standard practice as it allows you to freely rotate off and help either A, Garage, or C. Of course, people can updraft, TP, or blast pack over, but since there's a wall, it's also hard to judge what's going on from behind the point of the view of the enemy. This makes going over exceptionally risky, and that's usually a pretty strong deterrent. Essentially, you place your wall and stop worrying about the area for 40 seconds. But there's a catch. After placing it, it takes 3.3 seconds to fortify, so the wall will be at half HP for a short duration. This isn't that hard to play around, but it does mean that placing a wall early enough so that it isn't shot down instantly is quite advisable. Back in the beta when there wasn't a fortify period, it would be a good strategy to delay and wait a few seconds before placing it, so that way you could get the most time out of your wall. Think of Split. Since running up mid would take a couple of seconds, you could delay placing your wall there as well, since enemies can't be there yet anyways. But nowadays, getting 3 extra seconds of your mid wall probably isn't worth the risk of it being fully broken in less than that amount of time. So either use it some seconds before enemies make contact so that it has time to fortify, or save it for a later time in the round, like to defuse or block off another area. Another use for the wall, and one that's perhaps the most fun way of using it, is to use it in a grim wall style. A wall that doesn't block off your enemies from an area per se, but rather just something that allows you to pick up a kill or two, which can be equally valuable. Grim walls come from a content creator named Grim, who mains Sage, and is perhaps the single most creative person in his wall placement. He figured out early that using your wall to boost yourself in unpredictable positions can give you angles and positions that enemies don't expect you to be in. One of my personal favorites is using them in the Pit of the Pearl, a bomb site, so that way I can catch anyone that pushes into the site massively off guard. But of course, there's a ton of angles where you can use your wall to get into weird spots enemies don't expect you to be. Naturally, like with anything that's meant to catch your enemies off guard through unpredictability, don't use it too often though. Even twice a half can be too much. But if you use your wall normally most rounds, and then use a Grim wall every now and then when you feel like you have a read, you could potentially get more value from an ability that's already very strong. Of course, this level of power doesn't come for free. At 400 credits, her wall is one of the most expensive abilities in the game, but since it is that strong, you kind of have an obligation to your team to buy it whenever you can. With the exception of full eco rounds, 400 credits is a lot on a pistol round, but since pistols do less damage to your wall, it is also more powerful. And when you can make the decision between 600 credits for heavy shields or 400 for a wall, that decision should also come easily, and you're going to have to sacrifice that extra 25 HP. Then for her third and final orb ability, her slow orb. Coming in at 200 credits apiece and allowing you to buy up to 2 per round, these little orbs can either be completely useless or reshape a round on their own. It all depends on how you use them. One of the best ways is to counter many ultimates. If the enemy uses Lockdown, Breach's Rolling Thunder, or even something like a Brimstone ultimate, you can stall their hit by slowing a main entrance. These type of ultimates have a relatively short window of opportunity, so a 50% slow that lasts for 7 seconds can seriously mess with it. Enemies might not be able to get out on time, and sometimes it feels like a complete counter. Her slows are also particularly effective when paired with utility that might be weaker on their own. If someone is in a corner, slowing them doesn't do much, but if a raised nade is tossed at them a second later, escaping that becomes a bit of a mission impossible. Even a Viper molly that normally isn't exactly super scary damage-wise becomes a lot more deadly if you stay in it for double the time. And mollies that are already strong like Brimstone and Phoenixes become straight up death if you try to beat them slowed. Another great way to use slows is to heavily disadvantage players that really want to or perhaps even have to peek you. If you are in a 2v1 retake with a teammate and positions are known, you can slow the enemy. Your teammate can start the defuse and you're pretty much guaranteed to win the fight, as a slowed peek is anything but favorable. In the same way, you can also use your slows when you're aggressively pushing sites. If you slow an area like backside of A on Icebox, it makes it really hard to peek from there, and you can use that to quickly take control. Perhaps the last good reason to use a slow is to reinforce your wall, specifically if it's on an entrance. Say your enemies decide to go A on Ascent. You anticipated this, so you walled it off. Now you leave them with two choices. Either they leave and try elsewhere, in which case crisis averted, or they go for it anyways and opt to break your wall. This is a good time to slow in the same spot as your wall. They've broken 1 or 2 pieces, but because of the slow, pushing feels very difficult regardless. Technically speaking, they could still force a hit, but pushing through a half-broken wall with slows on the floor is a prospect that doesn't exactly excite many teams. Realistically speaking, they won't, and even if they do, pushing through all that should make your defense hold a lot easier. So that's all of her basic abilities. What about her ultimate? Well, Sage has one of the strongest ultimates in the game, at least in theory. After you manage to collect 8 orbs, you'll be able to revive an ally back to 100 HP. Though strong on paper, her ultimate is a bit of a double-edged sword. Yes, it can make a hard to win 1v3 into a very winnable 2v2, or it can help you revive a teammate and gain back an equal footing after they died an early death. But there will always be times where it feels like you don't even have an ultimate, just a debuff. Whenever you have your ultimate, you want to be playing somewhat passively just so you can use it. But this might force you to not take fights on your own, or take control of areas that you would have normally easily taken. And if then none of your teammates die in a position where reviving them is possible, then it really does more harm than good. Playing for your ultimate only for your teammates to die deep behind enemy lines can be super frustrating. And then there's also the question of, should I even use my res, or is it not even worth it? If you're in a 1v5, it's pretty obvious you shouldn't. That's near impossible to win. But judging whether or not a round is winnable with a revive is a gray area that can come down to your own personal judgment of the situation. Sometimes a res might also seem really good. Someone died to an AWP early on A main on Fracture, but if the enemy Brim is near with his ultimate, it's not a good res. Similarly, using a revive after the round ends might seem near pointless, but if it's round 3 or 4 and you just won a 1v3, it might actually be a really good idea, just so that you can get the economy going. This type of revive is called an economy res, and they can be the difference between having 2 guns or 4 in the following round. There's a lot of factors that go into using resurrection, but as long as you think about the state of the round, the enemy's ultimate economy, as well as your own economy early into the half, you should be well on your way to using it correctly. Now onto playstyles, and honestly there isn't really one specific one you should live by. Sage is not a good lurker since none of her abilities really help her with it, and both of her heal and res are best used on teammates. But other than that, you have a lot of freedom with what you want to do. Admittedly, on maps where she's very strong like Icebox and Pearl, you have very specific jobs to do, like walling off for B plant, walling off back site, walling off art, or walling off B long plant. And you're pretty much expected to do these tasks or else your team probably loses. But on defense and on maps where she's good but not a must pick, there's a variety of different things you can do and get value from. You could use your wall to hold sites or guard important areas. Think Ascent short, split mid, or Haven B. You could even use your wall to get kills in creative ways. You can play Sage somewhat aggressively trading your duelists, but you can also be a bit more passive if you don't have the proper sentinel to hold the flank. All in all, Sage is a solid agent that has both strong abilities to get value from, as well as a good amount of freedom so you can develop your own playstyle and experiment with different things. Her wall is her strongest ability, but also her heal, revive, and slow orbs are clearly useful in their own ways. Don't fall into the trap of thinking Sage is just a healer. She is a good asset to any team as long as you play her right. And that's going to wrap up the guide. Thanks for watching. If you want to see more like this, make sure to subscribe. This has been your host Sergeant Frost, and I will see you all again in the next one.